Welcome to this tutorial on Spring Boot RestClient, the modern way to make HTTP calls in Java. If you have been working with Spring Boot for a while, you have probably used RestTemplate or maybe even tried WebClient. But Spring Boot 3.2 introduced something new, that is RestClient, a clean, fluent and type-safe HTTP client built for today's applications. In this video, we are going to break down what RestClient is, why it was introduced, how it compares to older approaches, and how to use it with real code examples. Whether you are a beginner just getting started or an intermediate developer looking to modernize your code base, this tutorial is for you. Let's dive in. Before we talk about REST client, we need to understand why it was needed in the first place. REST template has been the go-to HTTP client in Spring since version 3.0, and for a long time it did the job. But as Java and Spring evolved, its limitations became more and more apparent. First, it requires a lot of boilerplate. Just to make a simple GET request with a header, you need to create an HTTP headers object, wrap it in an HTTP entity, then call the exchange method with multiple parameters. Second, it has no Fluent API. You can't chain methods calls in a readable way like modern libraries allow. Third, it's blocking and synchronous with no path to reactive programming. And finally, Spring has put REST template into maintenance mode. It still works, but it won't receive new features. The Spring team recognized these issues, and that's exactly why REST client was born. Now you might be wondering, why not just use web client? Spring already introduced it as the modern replacement. Great question. Let's compare all the three side by side. REST template is blocking, imperative, and legacy. It uses one thread per request and was designed for the servlet world before reactive programming existed. Web client, on the other hand, is non-blocking, reactive, and part of the Spring WebFlux stack. It uses Project Reactor under the hood with Mono and Flux types. It's extremely powerful, but it comes with a steeper learning curve. And on the other hand, the REST client, it is the best of both the worlds for most applications. It's synchronous like REST template, so no reactive complexity. But it has a Fluent builder-based API just like web client. So the decision guide is simple. If you are working on legacy code, stick with the REST template. But if you are building a high concurrency reactive system, use web client. And if you are starting a new project 3.2 plus servlet application, use REST client. It's clean, modern, and the recommended approach going forward. So what exactly is REST client at its core? Think of it as a synchronous HTTP client with a web client style API, but without any reactive dependency. Under the hood, it shares the same message converters, codecs, and exchange filters as web client. This means you get consistent behavior across your application whether you are using REST client or web client. It was introduced in Spring Framework 6.1 and is auto-configured in Spring Boot 3.2 via RESTClient.builder-bean. Design philosophy is to minimize boilerplate, maximize readability, and make HTTP calls feel natural in Java. Now let's look at how to set up REST client in your Spring Boot application. The simplest way is to auto-wire a RESTClient.builder-bean, which Spring Boot automatically provides. You can then call .base URL to set a default base URL for all requests, add default headers, and then call the build to get your REST client instance. Let's look at how to set up REST client in your Spring Boot application. The simplest way is to auto-wire a RESTClient.builder-bean, which Spring Boot automatically provides. You can then call .base URL to set a default base URL for all requests. You can add default headers, and you can also add request interceptors, whatever you want. And then call the .build to get your REST client instance. You can also inject REST client directly if you have declared it as a bean. Best practice is to create a single REST client instance per service or domain and inject it wherever needed. This keeps your configuration clean and avoids creating new client instances on every request. Now let's make our first real HTTP call with REST client, a GET request. It's refreshingly simple. You call client.get method, chain.uri method with your endpoint, and then .retrieve method, and finally .body with expected return type. Spring handles deserialization automatically using Jackson. You can use URI variables directly in the path, or build a full URI with URI components builder for more complex queries. Compare this to the old REST template approach we saw earlier. The difference is dramatic. REST client makes your HTTP code read like English, and that's exactly the point. For post requests, REST client is equally clean. You call client.post, set the URI, then use content type to specify the media type, and then body to provide your request payload as a Java object, and then the retrieve method to execute. You can then call toBodies entity if you only care about the status, or .body response type .class if you expect a response type object. Spring automatically serializes your Java object to JSON using Jackson. No manual conversion needed. This is especially powerful for REST API integrations in microservices where you are constantly sending data between services. One of the most important aspects of any HTTP client is robust error handling. REST client throws HTTP client error exception for 4xx responses and HTTP server error exception for 5xx responses automatically. You can customize this behavior using the onStatus method to intercept specific status codes and throw meaningful business exceptions. For success responses, you can call toEntity method to get a response entity with status, headers, and body all together. Best practice is to always wrap your REST client calls in try-catch blocks, log errors properly, and use custom exception classes for better observability in microservices. So when should you actually choose REST client over the alternatives? Use REST client when you're building a standard Spring MVC application, not a reactive one. It's perfect for microservices that need to call other REST APIs synchronously, which is the majority of real-world enterprise applications. It's also great when you want clean, readable HTTP code without the reactive complexity of Mono and Flux. If you are migrating from RestTemplate, REST client is the most natural upgrade path. The mental model is similar, but the API is much cleaner. Avoid it if you need to true non-blocking input-output operations, high concurrency with back pressure, or streaming responses. Those use cases are better served by WebClient. So let's wrap up with the key takeaways from this tutorial. REST client is Spring's modern synchronous Fluent HTTP client introduced in Spring Framework 6.1, auto-configured in Spring Boot 3.2 Plus. It replaces RestTemplate as the recommended choice for new synchronous HTTP calls. It shares internals with WebClient, codecs, filters, converters, etc., giving you consistency without reactive complexity. The three-line pattern is all you need. For get and post requests, you call the URI, then retrieve, and then the body method. For most Spring Boot 3.2 Plus applications, REST client is the right default choice. If you find this tutorial helpful, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and drop a comment below with any questions. Thanks for watching.